I'm 35, male, and I work as an IT consultant. I'd say I'm pretty average, a regular guy trying to make a decent living, keep my marriage afloat, and maybe, just maybe, retire early enough to enjoy life without stress. My wife and I have been married for 7 years. She's 33, works as a graphic designer, and honestly, I thought we had a good thing going. Sure, we had our ups and downs like any couple, but nothing that made me think my life was about to implode. It all started on a random Thursday evening. My wife told me she was heading to her mom's place for a couple of days. Her mom lives about 2 hours away, so it wasn't unusual for her to go visit when she felt like catching up. She packed an overnight bag, gave me a kiss on the cheek, and said, "Don't burn the house down while I'm gone." I laughed, told her I'd try my best, and that was that. Except, something didn't sit right with me. You know that gut feeling you get when something's off, but you can't quite put your finger on it? That's what hit me after she walked out the door. It wasn't like she hadn't stayed at her mom's before, but this time, something was different. Her tone, her body language, it felt forced, rehearsed even. I shook it off, chalking it up to my imagination. But as the evening dragged on, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. I tried calling her later that night, just to check in, but she didn't answer. No big deal, I thought. Maybe she was busy catching up with her mom. But then I texted her, and the reply I got didn't feel like her. It was short, cold even. "All good here. Don't worry about me." That's not how she usually texts. Normally, she'd send me some goofy meme or a photo of her mom's cat. By the time I went to bed, my paranoia was in full swing. I had no proof of anything, just a nagging feeling that refused to leave me alone. The next day, I went to work like usual, but I couldn't focus. I kept replaying the events of the previous night in my head, trying to figure out what was bothering me so much. Around noon, I decided to take a break and clear my head. That's when I got the idea. See, my wife has a location-sharing app on her phone that we both use, mainly for safety reasons. I pulled it up, fully expecting to see her in her mom's neighborhood. But she wasn't. She was in a completely different part of town, about 20 minutes away from her mom's place. My heart dropped. I told myself it could be a mistake, maybe a glitch in the app, but deep down I knew better. I decided to investigate. On my lunch break, I drove to the location. It was a small cafe tucked into a quiet corner of the city. I parked a little down the street, out of sight, and waited. After about 15 minutes, I saw her walk out of the cafe. She wasn't alone. There was a man with her. Tall, dark-haired, maybe mid-30s. He was laughing at something she said, and she was leaning into him in a way that made my stomach turn. They walked to his car, a shiny black sedan, and drove off. I followed them. I'm not proud of it, but in that moment, all rational thought went out the window. I tailed them to a hotel about 10 minutes away. They parked, got out, and walked inside together. I sat in my car for what felt like an eternity, staring at the hotel entrance. My hands were shaking. My mind was racing. I knew I needed proof, something concrete. So, I snapped a few photos of them walking in together. Then I waited. After about 2 hours, they came back out. This time, they looked comfortable. Familiar. She was holding his hand, and he kissed her on the cheek before they got back in the car. I snapped more photos. I felt like my entire world had just crumbled. When I got home that night, she texted me saying she decided to stay at her mom's for one more day. I didn't reply. Instead, I started gathering evidence. I combed through her social media, her emails, even our bank statements. It didn't take long to piece things together. There were charges for fancy restaurants I'd never been to, hotel stays I knew nothing about, and even a few jewelry purchases I'd never seen her wear. She was living a double life. That night, I barely slept. I didn't confront her right away. I needed to be smart about this. I reached out to a divorce attorney the next morning and scheduled a consultation. By the time she came home the next evening, I had a plan. When she walked in, I acted normal. She gave me a quick peck on the cheek and asked how my day was. I could barely look at her. Over the next few weeks, I played the part of the clueless husband while quietly building my case. I installed cameras around the house, checked her phone when she wasn't looking, and even hired a private investigator to dig deeper into her affair. It wasn't just a fling. This had been going on for months. She had been lying to me for months while parading around with this guy, living out some fantasy at my expense. And the worst part? She didn't have a clue that I knew. I made sure to collect everything, texts, photos, financial records. I wanted airtight evidence, not just for myself, but for court. Eventually, I had everything I needed. The final straw came when I found out she had used money from our joint account to pay for a weekend getaway with him. That's when I knew I was done playing nice. I didn't confront her right away. No, that would have been too easy. Too clean. I wanted her to feel the weight of her actions. I wanted to dismantle the web of lies she'd spun and make sure she faced the consequences. First, I met with my lawyer again to map out the legal side of things. In my state, adultery can have a significant impact on divorce proceedings, especially when it comes to things like spousal support. My lawyer was blunt. Get everything in order. Documentation. Witnesses. The more irrefutable, the better. And keep this quiet until you're ready to file. I took those words to heart. Over the next 2 weeks, I set the trap. The first thing I did was open a separate bank account and start moving my paychecks into it. I didn't drain the joint account all at once. That would have tipped her off. Instead, I transferred small amounts here and there, enough to leave a decent buffer, but not enough for her to notice. I also put a freeze on my credit cards and changed the passwords to my personal accounts. Next, I got in touch with the private investigator again. I wanted more dirt, not just on her, but on the guy too. It turned out he wasn't just some random fling. He was married, with 2 kids. The PI managed to dig up his wife's contact information, and I debated whether or not to reach out to her. In the end, I decided to hold off. I wanted to focus on my own situation first. The hardest part was pretending everything was fine at home. She was still playing the role of the loving wife, cooking dinner, asking about my day, even suggesting we plan a vacation together. The sheer audacity of it all made my blood boil, but I kept my composure. I wanted her to think I was completely oblivious. Then came the day I'd been waiting for. I gathered everything. Photos, text message screenshots, financial records, even a copy of her hotel receipts. My lawyer filed the divorce papers, citing adultery as the reason. That same evening, I set the stage for the confrontation. When she came home, I was sitting in the living room, calm but visibly serious. She noticed right away that something was off. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting her bag down. "Sit down," I said, motioning to the couch. She hesitated but did as I asked. I pulled out the stack of evidence I'd compiled and placed it on the coffee table in front of her. "What's this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "You tell me," I replied, leaning back in my chair. She flipped through the papers, her face growing paler with each passing second. The photos of her and the guy at the cafe. The hotel receipts. The screenshots of their text messages. The bank statements showing her spending habits. By the time she looked up at me, she was on the verge of tears. "I can explain," she stammered. "No, you can't," I said flatly. "I know everything. The lies. The affair. The money. All of it." She started crying, mumbling something about how she didn't mean for it to happen, how she felt neglected, how it was just a mistake. I didn't let her finish. "You don't get to play the victim here," I said, my voice steady but cold. "You had every opportunity to talk to me, to tell me if something was wrong. Instead, you chose to betray me. You chose to humiliate me." She tried to reach for my hand, but I pulled away. "I've already filed for divorce," I continued. "And trust me, the court is going to see every single piece of evidence I've gathered. You won't be getting a dime of spousal support. Oh, and by the way, you might want to let your boyfriend know that his wife is about to get all of this, too." Her eyes widened in panic. "You talked to his wife?" "Not yet," I said, standing up. "But I will." She begged, pleaded, even tried to threaten me. She said I was being cruel, that I was overreacting, that she deserved a second chance. I didn't budge. "You made your choices," I told her. "Now you get to live with the consequences." She spent the night crying in the guest room. The next morning, I emailed everything I had to the guy's wife, along with a brief note explaining the situation. I didn't hear back from her right away, but when I did, she thanked me for telling her the truth. The fallout was swift and brutal. My lawyer ensured that the divorce proceedings moved as quickly as possible. My soon-to-be ex-wife's attempts at damage control were pathetic, to say the least. She tried everything to manipulate the situation: gaslighting, guilt-tripping, even threatening to expose some fabricated abuse to the court. Luckily, I had enough evidence to counter any lies she could dream up. Every move she made only dug her deeper into the hole she'd created for herself. The first hearing was a disaster for her. The evidence I presented was so damning that her own lawyer looked like they wanted to crawl under the table. The judge didn't mince words either. Adultery was taken very seriously in our jurisdiction, and the financial records showing she used joint funds for her affair sealed her fate. Her request for spousal support? Denied. Her plea for a larger share of marital assets? Denied. The judge even awarded me the majority of the assets, including our house, citing her blatant breach of trust and misuse of finances. She was left with little more than her personal belongings and a small portion of the savings. Watching her face as the judge read the verdict was satisfying, not because I enjoyed seeing her in pain, but because justice had been served. For months, she had lied, cheated, and betrayed me, thinking she could get away with it. She underestimated me. But it didn't end there. The guy she'd been cheating with? His wife didn't take the news lightly. Turns out, she was even more ruthless than I was. Not only did she kick him out and file for divorce, but she also went public with the affair. She posted the evidence I'd sent her on social media, tagging my ex-wife for good measure. The fallout was explosive. Within days, my ex-wife's friends and colleagues found out about the affair. She lost a major freelance client after they deemed her behavior unprofessional and damaging to their brand. Her reputation took a nosedive, and she became a social pariah almost overnight. Of course, she blamed me for her downfall. She sent me angry texts, accusing me of ruining her life, calling me petty and vindictive. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. The final nail in the coffin came a few weeks later when her boyfriend, now ex-boyfriend, completely ghosted her. I heard through the grapevine that he tried to reconcile with his wife, but she wasn't having it. Last I checked, he was living in some cheap motel while his wife moved forward with her divorce. As for me, the first few weeks after the divorce were tough. Even though I knew I'd done the right thing, there was still a part of me that felt hollow. 7 years of marriage gone just like that. But over time, I started to heal. I reconnected with old friends, threw myself into my work, and even started therapy to work through the emotional scars. Now, a year later, I can honestly say I'm in a much better place. I sold the house, too many memories, and moved to a new city for a fresh start. I've even started dating again, though I'm taking things slow. Looking back, I realized that betrayal doesn't just destroy trust. It destroys the foundation of everything you've built with someone. But it also teaches you about resilience, about standing up for yourself, and refusing to be a doormat. So yeah, if you're ever in a situation where someone you love betrays you, remember this. You don't have to let them walk all over you. Gather your evidence, protect yourself, and don't let them twist the narrative. And if you enjoyed this story, hit that subscribe button. Who knows? Maybe I'll share the story of how I started over and build a better life next time.